At time with Jordan. Is this mic on? The mic is live. Alright, we are ready to go. Foodie talk. Alright. On the radio, let's stop footing. Yes, this is AI. Keen to get started. Pump those ratings up high. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Alrighty guys, welcome back to another episode of Airtime with Jordan. I'm your host Jordan Faso, and we're done with Gather Round, so that was a good weekend of footy, I'd call it. A lot of high scoring as we saw over the weekend, and some really good games, some not so good games. I'm talking about my Hawks, of course, who, we'll get into that in a bit, I think. Unfortunately, it's going to be the first time I'm talking about them this year, and it's not in a good light, really, so... today on the app, we're of course starting out with our power rankings as per usual. Do that weekly, and then going to go through some of the teams I'm putting under the spotlight this week to come out of Gather Round. So good and bad. We've got Adelaide, Geelong, Collingwood, and then I'll close out with the Hawks as well. With some of the teams under the spotlight today, and then after that we'll of course finish off with our weekly Secret Star inductee. So. With that being said, let's get straight into it. We've got the power rankings this week after round 5. So at the top, we've got the Brizzy Lions. There's still no shift from them. And I feel like no one's really talking about the Lions. Obviously, everyone's sort of just like, they're good. But like, the switch that they've been able to pull, or push, whatever you want to call it, but in matches this year is like pretty impressive. That you could have counted them out against Geelong, the Bulldogs, West Coast, even when West Coast were up. Probably could have seen them coming back in that one, but Sydney as well. Like they've been down quite by considerable margins against those teams, and they've just had this switch and just turned the tide. And I think that. Unfortunately, not unfortunately for the Lions, they probably like it like that, but I think they're being slept on quite a bit, and they're quite clearly in a tier of their own right now for me. And that just to remind everyone that they have like Kitty Coleman and Tom Doedee to come potentially back into this team and bolster their defence, and in addition to that, Brendan Starcevich has only played one game, and I know he has some concussion issues to work through, but they've got 3 guys who. Some serious defenders and ball users as well, so I think that it's going to be exciting for the Lions as they continue to get stronger as the season goes on. So I just don't know if anyone's going to beat them at this point, and that's why I've got them in at position 1 and in a tier of their own, I think, in the power rankings so far this year. Number 2 in the rankings we have GWS, so I've put them up a spot. Another big performance against a red hot team in the Saints. The Saints were what they won 3 in a row at the end. So before this game, so it was a little bit of a danger game for the Giants there, and they got it done. And Toby is very much back to his best. I think something they didn't have last year in terms of him playing well. So that's going to hold them. I think it just raises the ceiling for them a little bit in terms of what they can accomplish this year. You've got him and Jesse Hogan absolutely dominating at the moment, and Aaron Cadman as well. I've been on him for a while, but he's looking very, very good. Aaron Cadman, he's coming along nicely for them. So very excited about the Giants and what they've got coming for the rest of the year, I think. Hawthorn, I've had to drop them. They were second on my board in the power rankings, but of course, after that sort of performance, you're going to get moved down a little bit. And I think for them, we've seen how good they have been at times this year. They haven't put together a 4-quarter performance, which is a little concerning. But I think absolutely this is a bit of a mulligan for them. A little bit worrisome that they didn't get up for a big game, but they. I guess that's the main concern, that they just didn't show up, and then the game was done after about. Arguably at quarter time, but definitely by half time. So it was an uphill battle, and I'm going to drop the Hawks a spot for that. And then Adelaide, I've actually bumped up one due to one of the other teams. I've dropped quite a bit after their performance on the weekend, and I know Adelaide lost, and I actually have Geelong 5th, so it probably doesn't make too much sense on paper, but I just still think that they did a lot right, and I'm just buying them, and it's obviously it's hard to move up after a loss, but the more I watch Adelaide, the more I'm buying them as a serious threat this year, and I'm going to go into them, as I said, into a bit more detail in the spotlight section. So them and Geelong I'll talk about a bit, but on the Geelong side, I've moved them up as well. They've gone up into 5th position here. So the awesome performance by them with that, especially from Dangerfield in enemy territory. Opening Gather Round, and that was without Tom Stewart and Jack Henry for the most part, which is just a huge win for them. coming in at 6th on the power rankings this week. I've got the Pies. They've come up 2 spots for me, and yeah, a bit of a system win from the Pies 2 weeks in a row without too many standout players individually, but I'm going to talk about that a bit more as well in a sec. So those 4 teams, ironically, are actually the ones that I'm going to talk about in depth today. So stay tuned if you're a fan of the Hawks, Adelaide, Geelong, or Collingwood. And then we've got Freo at 7. I think that they haven't moved them this week. They were 7 last week, 7 this week again. They had the Tigers. Nothing to see here really, but I think that the Pies are just better, so that's why I sort of dropped them down a bit. 8th. Yeah, so this is the team that fell a fair bit for me this week, and that's the Sydney Swans. I've moved them down 4 spots, and in my opinion, they weren't horrible against Collingwood, but they also had no chance in the end, and a big part of that is their group of key position players who are just really, really below average at the moment. Pretty much all of them, apart from Tom McCartan, I would say are considerably below average. Amati and McLean and Joel Hamling as well. Just a really rough group of key position players at the moment playing for the Swans, and I think it's really letting them down at the moment. There's only so much that their mids can do, and that they played so poorly, the forwards, that they had to move Tom McCartan forward again, and sort of force Blakey to be a key position player, taking a bit of what he offers off the table. And yeah, when you've got to do that, you're just sort of limiting themselves. I understand that they had to do that to give themselves a target up forward, because the guys they relied on during the large portion of the game just weren't getting it done. So you got to make some move, but it wasn't great. And I'm going to give them another week of this, and then might have to talk about them a bit in depth as well, I think. But Dane Rampy also is just a little bit on washed watch for me. I think that he's starting to look a little bit done. He isn't quite impacting one-on-ones as much as he used to. He's a little late when he's coming up to try and intercept or put pressure on someone out the back. So I think that he's definitely one to watch as the season goes on. I think he might be on the downswing a little bit. Obviously, amazing player for a long time. So won't spend too much time there, but I think I'm starting to see the ceiling on this team a little bit more than I thought. Grundy played well on the weekend as well, but I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath, especially as the season goes on with him. So I think Sydney have moved down a little bit. Obviously, they've still got the upside of Errol Goulden coming back, but that's only going to go so far, I think. And then we have the Gold Coast Suns at 9th again, and they haven't moved up or down for me this week. I'm still just not quite there, to be honest. I know that I'm probably going to end up being pretty late to the party on Gold Coast if they continue this form, but I just for a team that's never made the finals, that I have questions about their half back line as well. So I just want to wait and see how they go again. They've had the easiest start to the year of any team, I would say. They've only had the only hard team they've played is Adelaide, and they played them at home in 30 degree heat, and I know that's probably a bit of an excuse on my part, just conveniently, but I think that perhaps people forget that they were pretty lucky in that game as well. It could have gone Adelaide's way pretty easily there. So not quite there on the Suns. Acknowledge I'll probably be late to the party on that one though. The Doggies I have then at 10th. They've moved down a spot as well for me. They did a heat right, but they just came up against the juggernaut in the Lions. The Saints, I've moved them down as well. Actually, so the Doggies actually haven't moved down or up, but the Saints have moved down one. The Dogs have moved up, the Saints have moved down one. The Saints are 11th at the moment for me, and I think this showed that they've come back to earth with this game a bit. Jack McRae got the Toby Bedford treatment, and 17 touches from him after his hot start to the year is no wonder the Saints couldn't get their hand on the ball early on, and him not being able to get the clearance going for the Saints meant they were always going to be on the back foot here with their best mid unable to find the ball. So I think that's sort of why they lost. They just weren't able to get their hands on it and therefore get it into the hands of their better players. Messiah, my boy, he still played awesome. So 3 goals off halfback is pretty damn good. But I think that he obviously. It was him and then not many others contributing to the same level on the day, so that's why they've moved down for me. Port, they obviously had a big win against the Hawks at home. I'm leaving them where they are at 12. I sort of am laughing a little bit myself because I spoke about, when have all 3 of Rosie, Butters and Chase and Horn-Francis played a good game together, and, of course it happened against Hawthorn on the weekend, just my luck, but, they were just too good in the end, and Although, I will have a little clip and say that the salty Hawk fan in me does think that they may have just played their grand final. So, always get up for an emotional win, Port Adelaide, but let's see how they go afterwards. So for that reason, I'm just going to leave them where they are at the moment until they prove otherwise. And Carlton, they haven't moved either on me, either up or down for me. They're on the board at least. They're 1-4 now, and looking back at them being 1-4, they're not the worst 1-4 team to ever be in that position. Like, they've obviously dropped the Richmond game. They should have won quite clearly. They didn't, but they've been competitive in every game so far, so I think you've got to give them a bit of a pass and see what they can do. They've got North Melbourne this week, so another easy game for them, and should be on their way at least to be, a bit more of a chance of climbing up the ladder. Essendon, good to get this one, and really separate themselves from the bottom 4 teams. They haven't moved up or down for me. They're 14th still, so I think that they're quite clearly in a tier above the bottom 4 guys. The bottom 4 teams at the moment, and not that I had them in that group anyway before this game, but I think that the win against Melbourne is a clear reminder that they are absolutely in the tier above these other teams. And starting that group of other teams is North Melbourne. They're 15th for me. They've signed Luke Davies-Uniacke during the week for $1.3 million for however many years it was, 6-7 years, and I think it might be a bit rich. He's being paid like the best midfielder in the game is, and I get they had to pay overs to keep him in all likelihood, but there really isn't sort of a finish line in sight yet for North Melbourne, and these sort of losses just keep piling up, and the rebuild is looking like it's not over yet, which is concerning. I talked a little bit about them trading away their first round pick this year, and that's looking like a mistake. They clearly thought that they were ready to take a leap, and it's pretty evident so far that is not the case unless they turn things around pretty quickly here. So not great by North Melbourne. I thought that they'd be a bit more competitive than they have been, but that's why they're 15th on my power rankings. But they're still there again. They're probably the best of the worst 4 bunch in the league, and Melbourne are 16th on my power rankings. And yikes, that was a brutal game to lose. If they weren't already disheartened after that trip down to Geelong on the week prior, they definitely will be now. And in a game they would have given themselves a pretty decent chance of winning. And they're all just a bit washed. I think their best players, Petrarca probably excluded from that group, but they don't really have an ability to score the ball. They have about 2 or 3 good kicks in the team. Jake Bowie, I will shout out again. He is dominating at the moment, and deservedly so. Needs to be recognised, but I don't know. It's where do they go from here? At least they didn't give in to the Petrarca and Oliver trade requests last year. They held them ransom, and they might be forced to take less money elsewhere, Petrarca and Oliver, to even get out of Melbourne at the moment. And that in a way has actually helped Melbourne. I think makes the trades a little bit easier to complete. But there's no question in my mind this is heading for an absolute tear-down rebuild. They've already got some good kids coming through. But as I said, I was already concerned about that mid-range of players coming into the season, like in terms of age, but they're just giving them nothing really at the moment, and the stars of old are just not up to it anymore. And another concerning thing is they don't have their first round pick either, so Essendon owns that, and good business by Essendon last year to get that pick, and not good business by Melbourne looking back in hindsight. So hopefully they can recoup some value through trades and stuff like that. But we'll see where they end up for the rest of the year. But it's looking very grim at the moment at 0-5, and we have one bit of movement at the bottom end here. I've got Richmond moving up off the bottom there. They're 17th in my power rankings. They're bad, but they're meant to be this bad. I also feel like they're sort of outperforming their talent at the moment with the amount of kids they're playing and just general inexperienced players. But they're competitive. The senior guys as well in the middle are giving the youngings a floor to work off, I think, like a lot better than, for example, the next team I'm going to talk about are. So I think I've got to give Richmond their props there. They've been very competitive for a young team, and it's looking like they've got the right guys in place to lead this rebuild, and they have enough seasoned guys to sort of give the really young inexperienced guys a bit of cushion as well. So good stuff by Richmond, I think, so far this year. They absolutely get a pass mark so far. The team that doesn't is the West Coast Eagles. They are 18th on my power rankings. They have dropped quite considerably. Well, not considerably. They were pretty down the bottom, but I think they're quite clearly the worst team in the league at the moment, and it's really bad, guys. Like everyone's talked about how they had the lowest contested possessions ever recorded in a game, which is just shows that they're just not competitive. Like that's the main issue. They're the worst in the league right now, and on talent they probably shouldn't be. Like I think they probably have more talent than at least Richmond right now. I understand they got a few injuries, but yeah, it's looking pretty rough out there, and like I think when the effort should not be questioned, like that should be here every week, and when you make moves to get Liam Baker and Jack Graham in, I don't think those guys would have been expecting this sort of a performance from the team week in week out. So yeah, looking really bad for them, and I don't really know how far it's going to fall either. They could honestly just not win a game all year at this rate. So yeah, that's where I'm at with the power rankings, guys. So yeah, we'll keep going through them each week. It's a good way to just sort of touch on every team quickly, and then we'll get stuck into the actual teams in the spotlight this week. So starting off with, I won't spend as much time on these two as the other couple teams I want to touch on, but what a game between Adelaide and Geelong first and foremost. So with that being said, I will start with the Crows and why I still sort of have them above Geelong in the power rankings despite them winning on the weekend. Yeah, I sort of, it's similar to when they lost to Gold Coast last week. I came away from the game, sort of believing in them more, and I've done the same here. So I think that they've just showed like a gear to me that they can get to that I haven't really seen from many teams outside of Brisbane so far this year, offensively speaking, that is. And that they were coming off a 5-day break in 30-degree heat at the Gold Coast. So the Cats absolutely beat them, but you've got to acknowledge that wasn't the best lead up for the Crows, and maybe fatigue played into it. But either way, they lost. I understand Geelong were the better team on the night, and rightfully so. But the reason I'm so high on them is because I truly think they're just still building some chemistry. There's a lot of room left to grow in this group. They've got young players across the board. They've brought in James Peatling, Isaac Cumming, Alex Neil-Bullen that I've spoken about, and combine that with the fact that Riley Thilthorpe hasn't played much footy at all over the last couple of years. Like that's four guys, like four quite important guys in your best 22, all playing forward of centre of the ball. The team sort of just needs to gel with, and those guys need to fit in as well. So I think with that being said, the upside on this team is just super, super high. That's sort of why I have them where I do. I'm just a big believer in what they're going to be able to accomplish this year. And, I'll rattle off some stats that have sort of impressed me so far. They're first in goal assists, they're first in accuracy, second in shots on goal total, first in goals per inside 50, first in goals from the defensive half, and fourth in scores from the defensive half, and fourth in scores from the forward half. So, they have a very, very impressive offensive sort of profile at the moment, and that is with a group that I believe is yet to play their best footy together, and as they get even more chemistry, their offense is just going to keep leveling up again. So that's why I'm really high on the Crows. They're pretty scary for mine, and their post-clearance contested possessions and ground ball get stats are top 3 as well, which bodes really well for finals footy as well, as we all know. So I just couldn't be higher on the Crows at the moment, and I think hopefully they bounce back after a couple of disappointing losses. I know that they still need to get over the line in those losses, and their best hasn't been good enough so far. But just where I think they can get to, I'm pretty high on them at the moment, and that's sort of the justification for putting them where I did in the power rankings. Geelong, on their side, I haven't got a heap to touch on. I just wanted to talk, obviously, really good to get that win without Tom Stewart and Jack Henry for the most part there. But yeah, I think their best is still really good as well. But the only thing I'm going to caution with Geelong is that they're relying very heavily on Patrick Dangerfield at the moment. The last 2 weeks he's been an absolute champion. Of course he is a champion. But he's also 35, so playing him forward, in theory, would sort of preserve him, but he's just playing like a maniac at the moment, and don't get me wrong, it's amazing to watch, and he's been like the best player on the ground quite comfortably the last 2 weeks, but I sort of wonder how sustainable that is for a 35-year-old across the full season, and if they can rack up some wins early, I would really urge them to be putting him on ice as much as possible, like throughout the middle of the year, coming into finals, and just make sure he's absolutely ready to tear the finals apart, because the amount that they're going to rely on him and Jeremy Cameron, I think, in particular, just gives me a little bit of caution. But they've been able to pull out some good wins in the last couple of weeks, so can't knock them too much. It's just something to note that I want to keep an eye on how reliant they are on a 35-year-old Dangerfield at the moment. So yeah, that's sort of all I got on those two teams. But a little bit of a deeper dive here in the spotlight under the for the Magpies under the spotlight. And I think they've had a really strong start to the year, apart from that first game against GWS, which every team I feel like gets a little bit of a mulligan. Hawthorn. But as I said in the power ranking section, they haven't really had to do it in a way where they've had to rely on their elite guys playing well to win. Like they haven't. I think that it's just about the system really holding up so far, and it's holding up really well. And when I watch them play, it's like they're almost playing foosball with their zone defense. It's just so condensed through the middle of the ground. They play super high up on the opposition, and like when they're trying to exit defensive 50, the opposition that is, the Collingwood are able to cover the ground in a really wide but condensed way. Like they've got so many numbers through the middle part of the ground, and then the back line of their zone, like where Darcy Moore is often, or Braden Maynard, for example, they're just ready to come up and almost slingshot into the next row of that like foosball defense, if you like. And if they see the ball coming through in like a gap or something like that, they're just shooting up and just capturing it straight away, and then they all sort of collapse in behind that like a net almost. It's just really structured and really good to watch at the moment, the Collingwood defense, and it's really hard to get through, especially when they are so organised and structured the way they are, and Darcy Moore and Scott Pendlebury are just orchestrating it at all times, and it makes for just a really connected group at the moment, and it's been really impressive to watch the last couple of weeks in particular. They've just absolutely strangled teams at the moment, and it's so well organised right now that my main concern with the Pies was their health, and their best 22 being as good as anyone's, I thought, coming into the year, but now their system is as good as anyone's too, so I sort of expect them to be able to handle any injuries that sort of come their way or any absences, and to be honest, they've already done that. They did that on the weekend. They didn't have Lockie Shields, they didn't have Dan Houston, they didn't have Jordan De Goey. They were all missing from their best 22 on the weekend, and they just, as I said, they absolutely strangled Sydney. So that's 2 weeks in a row that they've done that to the opposition, especially from being able to preventing the opposition from being able to utilise the corridor or find successive 45-degree angle kicks to open up their options. They just haven't allowed that to happen, and the pressure has been immense too. Like they're third in the league for tackles per game, and they're converting that into offense. So like when they do like end up strangling you, like I'm sort of talking about, they can just punish you as well. They're third in the league in scores from turnover differential at the moment, so they're just not allowing teams to punish them when they turn it over themselves, which just shows how organised they are behind the ball, but then have the ability to really put the score on the teams when they do force that turnover through the middle of the ground. And I think that they're doing it in a really nice way as well, with they're playing to their strengths. They know who they are. They've got a good coaching group who's identified like their strengths and weaknesses, obviously, and they know they don't have a Jesse Hogan or a Sam Darcy up forward, but they absolutely have three guys who compete to the best of their abilities, and that's sometimes all you need in a forward group. Like, just look at Sydney, like, not even just compete, but just do the basics really well. Like Sydney, like Hayden McLean, I can't imagine how many marks he dropped on the weekend or just got pushed out of position, whereas like the Myercheck, Membry and McStay, they're all like really, really competitive guys, and not often you see them completely lose a contest. And they rank 9th for inside 50s, but they jump up to 5th in shots at goal per inside 50. So that sort of tells me that they're making the most of what they get, and they're sort of outperforming their chances, so to speak. And sort of keeping with that soccer foosball theme that I brought up earlier with the Pies, that they almost play like a soccer sort of game where they use the wings quite heavily to attack, and then it's almost like they cross the ball in to the top of the goal square, and let their key forwards that I was talking about compete and sort of bring the ball to ground. Jeez. Bring the ball to ground, and that sort of brings their smalls into it. And the other thing is that Myercheck and Membry in particular, they're also good at crumbing. So like, it's not just the smalls that are getting this done. Bobby Hill had a good game on the weekend. Shout out to him. I've been a little bit critical of him, but he was good on the weekend. But yeah, it brings all those really dangerous small forwards into the game for the Pies, and as I said, the big guys are pretty good at that too. So I think it's probably more of an anecdotal thing with the crossing the ball in than actually having numbers on it. But I am really enjoying watching the Pies at the moment and the way that they're playing both sides of the ball. And yeah, I think they're building very nicely. And as I said, they've got a few guys out of their side at the moment, in particular, obviously, like the guys I mentioned earlier. But Nick Dacos also is yet to play a great game, in my opinion. I think he's played pretty good and had some nice patches in games, but I haven't seen him dominate a game yet this year. So yeah, I think that they have a lot of room to improve and a lot of room to grow. And so far, this system is really looking really, really strong. So they're going to be one to keep a track of as the year keeps going. Then we are going to unfortunately end on a bad note with the Hawks. So as I said, probably the first time I've really talked in depth. I just wanted to let them play it out a little bit to start the season, and unfortunately, I could not talk about them this week, and what a letdown. All season as a fan, I did have this one circled and was really keen for them to get the win over there, but they were just so non-competitive in the first half. It was pretty depressing as a fan, but they had no chance after the start that they gave themselves. And I think, just to clarify, they've shown that their best is absolutely good enough as well. I've said that with a few teams, but also they've shown quite a few flaws as well across the first few weeks of the season, and I'm not worried about the defence at all, although it did get a little bit exposed, but I don't think that was necessarily their fault on the weekend. But that end of the ground is so strong. You've got a plethora of guys who are really, really strong down there, good kicks, everything, can defend multiple positions, and Scrimshaw's still to come back into that side. He should be back for Easter Monday, and then the ability to put Hardwick down there to shift him around. I'm not worried about the defence. The mids as well, I think that they'll be fine as well. Obviously, Will Day's absence will hurt them. I don't think he's this important to the Hawks. I think they just had an absolute stinker, unfortunately for them. But as I said, I don't think Will Day's absence is going to hurt them too much in the long run. Obviously, they need him for finals, but having Meek palming it down to Newcomb, who's quietly becoming one of the best clearance players in the game. James Warple played well on the weekend again, his first game back. Hopefully he's not injured. Cam McKenzie, of course, emerging. So they have a lot of other guys to go through there, like Dylan Moore, etc. So I'm not, as I said, the backline midfield is not a worry. It's forward of the ball, which is the real issue right now. And I spoke about how good Collingwood have been at getting their keys to compete in the air and allowing their smalls to come into it, and that's something that Hawthorn just haven't been able to do consistently. Jack Gunston, bless his soul, legend of the club, he's ancient. He's not going. And he's also never been that sort of pack breaker that the Hawks really need at the moment. And Gunston also played awesome on the weekend. He was one of the few guys who probably could hold his head up high after that performance. But he's not that sort of player. Marby or Coll as well is more of a come from the side across the front of the pack, or just take a flat out specky. He's that sort of key forward. Neither of them are not going to provide that role of a key forward that's conducive to sort of getting smalls, like small forwards or medium forwards, into the game, but breaking packs or just breaking even. And I think that's a real concern for Hawthorn, because their small forwards are as good as it gets. You've got Dylan Moore, you've got Nick Watson, and you've got Connor McDonald to come back hopefully this week, who very underrated out for the Hawks. He provides a lot of that link-up play the same way that Dylan Moore does between the back line and the forward line. So not having him in the recent weeks has definitely hurt. So I think that's an underrated storyline, I think, where he helps with that connection just with his run and his skills, and he's just dangerous around goal as well. So I think that they definitely have some small forwards that are, as I said, are as good as it gets. But I think Ginnivan is the one that I've obviously excluded from that group. He's been pretty poor this year. I think that he could probably benefit from a run in the VFL to find a bit of form. But as I said, I don't think that the issues are inherently the small forwards, but the issue is with the key forwards and the lack thereof, I guess. Hawthorn look great when they're able to cut teams up with their ball movement, but this was sort of one of my concerns in the preseason, is that, when teams slow them down like Port Adelaide did, or teams get them on the back foot, they don't have a great option up forward to sort of be that pillar down the wing to just have an option to take territory or create a contest where Meek is absolutely pretty good at that, but he's only one guy in a pack of six, and sometimes you need two to bring it to ground or draw even in those scenarios. And as I said, it's not. I don't even think it's necessarily about Marby or Coll or Jack Gunston's deficiencies as players. I think that they have arguments and skill sets to keep them in the best 22 at times, but it's just a hole in the list at the moment, not having that big key forward who can consistently provide a contest. And that, and therefore limiting what the dangerous small guys can do for them. And I think Coll had a really good first year last year. He showed promise. Had a huge final series, or the first elimination final was huge by him, but he's out with a stress fracture in his back, I think, and I'd be concerned about him coming back at the same level straight away as he did last year. And also, he's only 20. He's not necessarily going to be breaking packs, but he will provide a contest at his best. But, I wouldn't necessarily be relying on him with the injury he's had. Mitch Lewis is the obvious one as well, but he's just perpetually injured as well, so that doesn't fill me with much promise either. I don't think it's something that they're going to be able to figure out this year unless, Mitch Lewis is healthy, because he is that archetype. He is able to do the things that I'm talking about that I think they need, but it's definitely something they're going to have to address in the off-season, Oscar Allen. But I think that they still have enough talent to cause some trouble and be a top 4 team, but ultimately I think the odds of them winning a premiership with this group of key forwards right now might be a bit smaller than I and many others probably would have thought heading into the year. So that's sort of like where I'm at with them. I think their best is really good, their ball movement is really good, their defense is really good. I think they just lack that last little piece of just a big key forward that can provide a contest for them down the line and in the forward line as well. So I don't think they're going to get it this year, but maybe Mitch Lewis comes back, or maybe Coll comes back and provides that. But I don't. As I said, Coll is 20. He's not going to be that consistent at this point in his career. Mitch Lewis as well is not the healthiest player ever. So I don't think you're relying on him. So if everything goes well, Mitch Lewis could be that, but I just don't see it happening, unfortunately, for the Hawks this year. Not to say that they won't win the premiership, so go Hawks. Anyway, let's close it out. Let's get to do the Gather Round Secret Star Society inductee, and that's Brad Close from the Geelong Footy Club. I feel like he gets forgotten a little bit amongst, the likes of Stengel, Brian Myers, Ollie Henry. Of course, they've got Jeremy Cameron as well. Ollie Dempsey plays down there at times, but he's every bit as good as those guys, I think, especially the small forwards. And based on his form this year, I'd probably argue he's been the best of that group. He's just a really smart player, I think, who always seems to find himself in the right position. He's around his stats, and his similarity comes out closest to GWS gun Darcy Jones as well. So, and the main part of those guys' games is, their goal assists and score involvements, being that link-up player and just providing run in the forward half. So, he's really clean with the ball. He's above average in both disposal and kicking efficiency. He's got great pressure for a small forward, ranks elite for intercept possessions for forwards, which, is obviously not the most important stat, but it's pretty handy to have someone who is able to do that. And he doesn't miss either. He goes at 83.3% goal accuracy at the moment this year. So, I think he's just one of those guys who's a really elite cog in the machine, he would be for any team, but he is for Geelong specifically. So, I don't think he's necessarily going to take another leap in his career and become like an out-and-out superstar or anything like that. But, he's a winning player, and for mine, I like those sort of players who just contribute to winning in that way. And, love the way he goes about it. I think he deserves a bit of praise. And, as I said, I feel like he gets forgotten a little bit in that group, so I just wanted to highlight Brad Close this week and, how good he is and how consistent he is for the Cats. So, hopefully that's not the case on Easter Monday, and the Hawks can bounce back against another rival. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, enjoy the week, guys, and we'll be back next week with some more footy talk.